their brains were so small that they did not understand even simple words. The blonde swung his fist, saying that this is how it should be done and that all his strength should be put into the blow. The slightly beaten men looked at the blonde in bewilderment. Diego asked why they stopped and that they had completely lost their minds. The blonde glared at the men, asking that they wanted their wives and children to die of hunger. The men grinned in displeasure. The bald-headed man hit his opponent, after which the brown-haired man hit the bald-headed man. Diego watched with a mad smile, saying that this was already better. The protagonist sat next to Diego, smiling madly, saying that this was just wonderful. The blonde jumped back from the protagonist in horror, screaming loudly. Lloyd said that he was always so shocked when he saw him, and he was making him look bad. The men looked at what was happening in confusion. Lloyd asked who they were. Diego said that they were pathetic servants of his house. The main character walked towards the men with a smile. He said that a certain hierarchy is, of course, cool and he can have fun like this, asking that isn't he right. The young master smiled widely, pointing his finger at himself. He asked to let him join them, noting that he also wants to try. Diego was shaking in fear, asking how he could let him fight like them. The young master smiled widely, pointing his finger at the blonde. He asked what he was talking about and that he was slow-witted, adding that he was asking him to fight because he himself did not intend to swing his fists. The blonde looked at the protagonist in horror. Lloyd said that he would be in the red corner and Xavier would be in the blue. The young gentleman pointed his finger at the swordsman. Xavier closed his eyes and sighed heavily. The knight took out his weapon, saying that since it was the count's order, he could only obey, so it was time to begin. Diego asked him to stop, asking what it was, adding that he should hide his sword. The protagonist looked at the guy in bewilderment, asking why he was asking to stop, noting that he could also take the sword if he thought it would be fairer. The blonde noted that the problem was not with the sword, after which he bowed before the count, asking to let him go. Lloyd asked that, apparently, the sword master was ruining the whole picture. The count's face twisted into a mad smile. He said that then let him fight him. Xavier clicked his tongue in displeasure at the moment when Diego looked at the count in horror. The protagonist's eyes widened and he threw a furious punch at the blonde man's face. The sun was shining brightly above the place. The blonde man was lying on the ground with his teeth knocked out. The protagonist leaned over the piece of paper. He said that this document was proof of his return to school and it would be better to write down today's incident. The blonde man asked the count not to write it down. The young master looked at the boy with a furious look, asking why he was only stopping everyone, noting that he was the count's son. Peepodong flew astride Jigoming, who was carrying the document on his chest. The young master looked up while the men lowered their heads. The injured men looked at the protagonist in surprise, who told them to relax. The protagonist turned his back, waving his hand at them. He told them to go to Frontera and find Mr. Bayern, and from now on they would work for him, so they should not slack off. The men saw the protagonist off with tears in their eyes. Rekona jumped out of bed, screaming loudly. He bared his teeth in displeasure and clenched his hands into fists. Rekona noted that this bastard had disturbed his sleep again, and what an unpleasant way to start the day. The Viscount looked angrily towards the door. The man said that he needed to say something. Rekona asked who dared to knock on the door of his room, adding that he should get lost immediately. Rekona grabbed his whip with a furious expression. The man said that it was urgent and he needed to talk to him immediately. The Viscount asked how some scum dared to contradict him and that he had not beaten him for a long time. The protagonist's distraught face appeared from the half-open door. Lloyd asked that they had not seen each other for a long time. Rekona immediately collapsed on the floor, closing his eyes. The protagonist smiled madly, looking at the knight, asking that his face was really so scary. Xavier noted that he was definitely not the type to give comfort to others. The main character threw his arm over the Viscount's shoulder, noting that his lands extended from there. Lloyd waved his hand, saying that it extended to there. The Viscount looked at the young gentleman in horror. The young gentleman told him to mean that he intended to level the hilly areas and build a quarry. Rekona asked why he had suddenly decided to do that. The main character pulled the old man's mustache, asking why he was behaving like that. He then looked at him with a furious look, asking if he really needed to explain anything. Lloyd imagined a sewer with water. He noted that it would be better to use granite for the sewer canals instead of cement, and that way they could be sure of its durability in the coming years. The young gentleman looked behind him, where the workers were standing. He said that now it was time to pave the way from the quarry to their estate, one straight path. The men stood in front of Rekona's mansion. The worker asked that they would face obstacles from the very beginning. The man with a furious look swung his hammer, saying that there was only one straight path. The Viscount watched in horror as the workers tore his building into two parts. The protagonist stood behind the old man with a smile. He told him not to worry, and they would build him a new house to live in, and they would send the workers from his mansion to their estate and assign him one assistant to carry out orders. There was a tent on the ground. Melika was sitting in the tent with her head down. Rekona and Diego were sitting not far from her. Melika looked at the boys, asking if they needed anything. The old man said that they didn't need anything. Bayern looked straight ahead with a serious look, pressing his fist to his chest. The protagonist noted that control over the granite transportation road, as well as the construction of the quarry, would be entrusted to Mr. Bayern because he had passed the veteran level and reached the maestro level. A system window with skills, understanding of design, administrative tasks, and so on appeared. Baibong tore out trees with a furious look. The orcs carried logs on their shoulders. Lloyd noted that leveling the landscape for the construction of the quarry was not a problem, because their county was full of monsters that could handle this task perfectly. The monsters were dragging carts with earth and trees. The man shouted for them to raise their noses higher. That's it. Nuira and the other elves raised their fists in the air. She shouted about meat. The protagonist noted that elves are responsible for the construction of buildings. They are able to repeat the same process thanks to their incredible understanding and powerful physical strength. The protagonist thoughtfully looked at the blank sheets of paper. He noted that all that was left was to deal with the sludge. The protagonist rested his face in his hand. He wondered what would motivate the workers to dig it up with shovels, adding that it was unpleasant to dig through waste and they could be poisoned by the toxic fumes, and the best solution would be to heat the sludge to the maximum level. The young master grabbed his head with his hands. He thought that maybe Xavier, he, or Belle could do it, although it was a crazy idea, wondering who knew what would be exposed there and how they would be able to do it on a daily basis. The protagonist lowered his head, wondering where he could find a slave who could control fire and work in the sewers. The young master sat motionless in one position. Then he snapped his fingers. The protagonist smiled madly, saying that he knew where to find such a slave. Black smoke was coming out of the forge. The protagonist stood in front of the master. Corgetus asked him if he wanted him to smelt armor from the resin of the Alencia tree. The master looked at the young master in bewilderment, asking why he needed it and that he was going to hunt dragons or something. The protagonist smiled widely, saying that it was so. The master looked at the main character with curiosity, asking who would be catching him. The count's son smiled widely, pointing his finger at the swordsman, saying that it would be him. Xavier looked at the young master in bewilderment, after which he turned his head away and closed his eyes. The weather was clear above the mountains. Somewhere far, far away in the depths of the eastern mountains, water flowed in a cave. A stone flew off the ground. The dragon said that he had enough. In the cave, a red dragon sat on precious stones. The monster closed its eyes, noting that there were too many gems, wondering why it could not limit at least one. Water dripped from the ceiling. Bright sunlight filtered through into the cave. The dragon sat with his head down, noting that he wanted to get married. His paws were shaking. The dragon noted that they were dull hook hands and damned stumps. The monster imagined colorful stones. He noted that he needed to create beautiful and tasty stones so that he could feed them to his cub. Only then would a worthy female recognize him. There were broken gems on the ground. The dragon said that he was great at destroying everything, but that was exactly what dragons hated the most. The monster looked at the gem, noting that cutting stones had not been so difficult in the past. A small beam appeared from the dragon's finger, heading into the stone. The dragon noted that cutting the stone was as easy as robbing a man's castle. The gem crumbled in the dragon's paw. The monster noted that kidnapping dwarves who did all the work for him. The huge dragon imagined a white-haired man with wings hugging a girl. He noted that one day, a certain dragon king married a mortal girl and came up with dragon rules. The dragon noted that all dragons were forbidden from plundering and threatening other races, and all dragons were sent to the mines where they would cut stones themselves. The monster closed his eyes, shedding tears. He said that the vile creatures came up with such a rule as soon as they had plundered enough stones for themselves, asking how they dared to show such good nature and force the younger generation to follow them. The dragon looked away in bewilderment when the guy said that he could fully understand his feelings. A guy in armor appeared in front of the dragon. He said that he had seen enough representatives of the older generation who speculated on the stock exchange and made a lot of money, and then told the youth that speculation was bad. The dragon looked at the guy furiously, asking that he had managed to bypass all his traps. Xavier and Lloyd were hiding behind the armor. The young master said that it was, and they would like to talk to the great dragon that he was, so they temporarily deactivated the traps. The dragon threw its head back, collecting non-magical energy. The protagonist asked that his name was Solitas, noting that he had a very good offer for him. The dragon spit fire towards the guys, telling him to die. The monster collected magical energy in its mouth, saying that he could not marry because of people like him. The guys covered their eyes with their helmets. Lloyd said that he knew that he would not be able to control his anger. Xavier asked, "So what is their plan?" The guys walked in the opposite direction from the dragon. Lloyd asked, "Didn't he already tell him?" The knight asked when it was, noting that he did not remember anything like that. The guys hid behind a rock as the dragon continued to spit fire. The young master said that he would defeat this dragon. The swordsman noted that this was a result, not a plan. The knight looked at the protagonist in confusion, telling him to stop joking and tell him what he needed to do, adding that he had walked this entire journey with him because he trusted his judgment. The protagonist looked at the knight, raising his index finger. He said that step 1 he fights, step 2 he defeats him. The protagonist pushed the knight aside, telling him to move. The dragon closed its mouth in confusion, watching what was happening. The knight sat on the ground, not moving. The dragon wondered why he was unharmed even after his dragon breath and whether there was some kind of power hidden in this stupid-looking armor. The dragon opened its mouth in rage, saying how this pissed him off, and then he would simply destroy him with brute force. The protagonist leaned out from behind a rock, saying that he could do it. Xavier looked at his blade, emitting an aura. The paw of a huge monster was approaching the knight. The swordsman dodged the blow and the dragon's paw hit the ground. The furious dragon swung its paw, saying that it was a small bug. The huge monster furiously began to hit the ground at the moment when the knight jumped aside. The dragon threw its head back, saying that it was so angry. Xavier narrowed his eyes, wondering what this was and that it seemed like he could really do it. The protagonist hid behind a rock, watching what was happening. He smiled sarcastically, thinking that this was exactly what he was waiting for. Xavier swung his blade, cutting off the dragon's horn. Lloyd noted that although it was not easy for him in the novel, Xavier still won. The huge monster hit its head on the ground. The protagonist noted that Xavier's strength in the novel was only at the level of a newly awakened sword master. The knight bounced off the ground, clutching his blade in his hand. The protagonist noted that he was slightly stronger than the queen and Kyle, but now. The swordsman jumped to the side, dodging the tail. A blue barrier appeared under the knight's feet. The young master noted that he was even stronger than the average sword master. Xavier bounced off the platform, rushing towards the monster. The protagonist noted that he was a supreme sword master and the young and weak Solitas would never defeat him. The dragon looked around in confusion, wondering what was going on and whether the man had just soared into the air. Xavier bounced off the blue platform into the air, clutching his blade in his hand. He noted that thanks to this, he would be able to use the explosion to move faster in the air. The protagonist watched with curiosity. He wondered if